We also congratulate the government on the progress we've seen on the ground, and I think that all of us must mobilize alongside our brothers and sisters in Burkina Faso.
The ECOWAS chairman has just praised undeniable progress in Burkina Faso. Yes, Burkina Faso, the country that left ECOWAS, the country they sanctioned, the country they warned would fall apart. So what did he see? And why is ECOWAS suddenly changing its tune? Let's find out. It wasn't said in a grand speech. There was no televised announcement or policy paper prepared for the press. It occurred during a low-profile briefing, one of those routine diplomatic sessions where officials recite updates that nobody listens to. But this time, the room shifted. The air got heavier, because in the middle of that monotone report, the ECO chairman said something that stopped every ear in its tracks. There is undeniable progress in Burkina Faso, just like that. Calm, measured. As if it wasn't the most explosive thing he could have said. No one reacted at first. It was the kind of sentence that doesn't land with a bang. It burned, slowly. A few diplomats exchanged glances. A junior reporter scribbled it down, unsure if it was even meant to be quoted. But by the time the briefing ended, it had already started to echo through the corridors of power. The country that had exited ECOWAS, defied its rules, resisted its warnings, was now being quietly praised by the man who symbolically leads the bloc. There was no context provided, no explanation, no walk back. The chairman simply moved on, as though the remark had no special weight. But that's exactly why it shook the room. Because in diplomacy, the most dangerous truths are the ones spoken casually. It wasn't part of a scripted peace overture. It wasn't a softening of sanctions. It wasn't even an official shift in policy, but it was something far more threatening to the ECOWAS establishment. It was honest. Those close to the chairman knew something had changed the moment he returned from his quiet visit to Burkina Faso. The mission had been labeled technical, but what he encountered on the ground couldn't be dismissed as technical progress. He met young engineers building hydropower grids from scratch. He walked through market hubs filled with homegrown produce in regions once written off as war zones. There were no foreign consultants, no UN banners, no aid workers guiding the show. The chairman saw something that no ECO meeting had ever fully described: Burkina Faso functioning on its terms. And maybe that's what disturbed him most. Not the signs of improvement, but the fact that none of it required ECO was at all. There were paved roads where maps once showed impassable terrain. There were schools filled with students whose parents had once fled the same villages. There was electricity in towns the bloc had written off, all without donor conditions, all without foreign troops, all without permission. That's what made the word progress so dangerous. Because it wasn't just an observation. It was a silent admission that the old narrative no longer fit. And if the chairman could see it, even just for a moment, then maybe others would too. And if more start seeing what he saw, then the authority ECO was once held over these breakaway states starts to crumble. Not with rebellion, but with results. The sentence may have been quiet, but the consequences are loud. Because now, for the first time, ECOWAS isn't just facing a political rebellion, it's facing proof. And the question now is, how does a bloc that once claimed to lead West Africa respond when the countries it tried to punish are the ones moving forward? What ECOWAS feared most wasn't Burkina Faso failing. It was Burkina Faso that succeeded. And now, that fear is becoming reality. Long before the chairman said a word, the silence from inside ECOWAS had already grown deafening. And not just the silence toward Burkina Faso, but the silence within. The meetings had become hollow. The declarations rang out with less conviction. Behind closed doors, ambassadors raised the same questions over and over again. If the breakaway states were so wrong, why were they still standing? The truth is, ECOWAS didn't lose control when Burkina Faso walked out. It lost control months earlier when its punishment stopped working. Sanctions were supposed to choke. Travel bans were meant to isolate. The freezing of financial support was designed to break morale, but none of it had the intended effect. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger responded not with desperation, but with defiance, and worse, their population stood behind them. Crowds gathered not to demand reintegration, but to mock ECOWAS as a hollow tool of foreign interests. When leaders who were sanctioned saw their approval ratings rise, the first cracks in the illusion of control appeared inside ECOWAS headquarters. The unease began as a whisper. Why were military governments not collapsing? Why were blacklisted officials more popular than ever? And perhaps most dangerously, why were other member states beginning to ask if the bloc had become too rigid, too slow, too divorced from African realities? Then came the trade contradictions. Goods meant to be blocked still found their way across borders through informal networks. Regional airlines resumed flights under different pretexts. Entire corridors of commerce adjusted to new realities faster than the diplomats could write memos. The tools ECO once used to enforce discipline had stopped biting, and nobody wanted to admit it. But the silence wasn't just a symptom of confusion. It was a symptom of fear. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger weren't trying to come back. They weren't pleading for acceptance. That terrified ECO was more than any rebellion. These weren't rogue elements. They were building alternatives, shared military pacts, coordinated currency talks, joint development projects. The more ECO tried to ignore them, the louder they became. Not in words, but in action. By the time the Alliance of Sahel states unveiled its formal confederation, it was too late. The bloc that was meant to be a temporary protest had matured into a functioning political machine. ECOWAS tried to pretend it was still in charge of the conversation, but it was no longer even in the room. The streets of Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou were filled with flags that didn't carry ECOWAS stars. The slogans had changed. So had the loyalties. What the chairman saw on his recent mission wasn't surprising to everyone. Some in the inner circle had been warning about it for months, but protocol kept the truth buried until that single phrase slipped out. Undeniable progress, and confirmed what had already become obvious. ECO was no longer controlled the narrative, because for a bloc built on soft power, the moment people stop believing your rules matter, you have no power at all. Let's pause for a second to say big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. Now the question is, did Burkina Faso deserve the praise? By the time the ECOWAS chairman arrived in Burkina Faso under the guise of a regional inspection visit, something had already shifted. Not in policy, but in posture. There were no red carpets, no diplomatic fuss, no long-winded welcomes. He wasn't treated like a powerful guest, but like a man coming to witness something he couldn't understand from his office. And that's exactly what happened. The streets of Ouagadougou were not quiet, but they weren't chaotic. They pulsed with movement. Buses running on time, vendors selling local produce in fully stocked stalls, neighborhoods restored after years of conflict. But this wasn't what caught his attention. It was what wasn't there. No visible signs of foreign aid trucks, no UN presence, no international NOSs, branding every wall. The development he was seeing bore one signature only: Burkina Faso. Everywhere he looked, function had replaced dependency. Local women led agricultural cooperatives producing enough grain to feed multiple provinces. Soldiers trained barefoot teenagers not to fight, but to wire electricity poles for their villages. In the northern region, once ruled by armed groups, he watched a class of young men operate bulldozers, military-issued, laying the foundation of a new regional medical center. There was no press coverage, no stage performances, just a quiet rhythm of people doing the work. People who had stopped waiting for help. Inside a newly built refinery outside Gawa, the chairman was shown how raw gold, once stolen or exported with no trace, was now being melted, refined, and sealed into certified bars by Burkina workers. One engineer explained that Burkina Faso had lost billions through unprocessed gold exports. So we stopped letting it leave the ground without value, she said simply, not knowing she had just summarized an entire revolution in economic logic. And this pattern repeated itself in the Sahel zone. What used to be refugee camps were now self-sufficient micro-communities with shared solar panels and water tanks sourced through military logistics. What was once too dangerous to govern was now a prototype for autonomous village defense. There were no mercenaries, no Western instructors. The training manuals were written in local languages. The uniforms stitched by tailor in Bobo Dioulasso. The rifles imported from new partners that didn't ask for loyalty, only payment. But the most jarring moment came not from an industrial site, but from a school. The chairman entered a classroom in the town of Jibo. It was small concrete floor, wooden benches, one teacher, 28 students, and a chalkboard. But on the wall was a banner that stopped him cold. We don't wait to be saved. We learn to save ourselves. It wasn't about rebellion, it was about rejection. A full rejection of the idea that progress must be borrowed, outsourced, or donated. Everything he saw that day echoed that message. Burkina Faso isn't rising because it was forgiven. It's rising because it refused to wait. And for a man who spent his entire career operating inside a structure that rewarded compliance and punished defiance, the realization was uncomfortable because this didn't collapse. This wasn't improvisation. It was an order. Indigenous, military-backed, unapologetically homegrown order. The chairman left without making a formal speech. There was nothing to say. The numbers would never tell this story, but his face had already betrayed it. Burkina Faso wasn't proving ECO was wrong with words. It was proving it wrong with roads, with classrooms, with functioning systems built outside the club. And that leads us to the most dangerous question of all. If this is what rebellion looks like, then what does success even mean anymore? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. When the ECOWAS chairman uttered the words undeniable progress, the world took it as a compliment. But those watching closely knew better. It wasn't a gesture of respect, it was a message. The chairman didn't break months of bloc-wide silence just to tip his hat to Ibrahim Traoré. That kind of deviation doesn't happen by accident. Not in regional politics. Not from someone who speaks for a system built on consensus and caution. Something had shifted, not just inside Burkina Faso, but inside ECOWAS. And it wasn't ideological, it was strategic. The very fact that he had to speak, that silence was no longer sustainable, signals that a deeper calculation was underway, one that had little to do with Burkina Faso's success and everything to do with ECOWAS's fear of becoming irrelevant. Until now, ECOWAS operated with the assumption that it could outlast defiance. That time would wear down the breakaway states, that sanctions, isolation, and lack of recognition would eventually make Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso return to the fold, either through desperation or collapse. But Traoré flipped the script. He didn't isolate, he built. He didn't seek legitimacy. He created results that couldn't be ignored. And worst of all, for ECOWAS, his model started inspiring whispers in other member states. Some leaders in coastal West Africa have already started asking dangerous questions behind closed doors. What if this military-led structure is more efficient than the bloated civilian ones we've protected? What if cutting off dependency creates real sovereignty? What if, instead of waiting for IMF directives, we build with what we already have? These questions are poison to a bloc that survives on uniformity, and the chairman knows it. So the praise, veiled as a casual remark, wasn't a peace offering. It was a flare, a signal to the remaining ECOWAS states that the center is wobbling, and that those in charge are preparing for a scenario in which they are no longer the sole architects of regional identity. It was also a subtle test. By acknowledging progress in Burkina Faso, the chairman put pressure on other ECOWAS leaders to pick a side. Do they continue pretending the Sahel has collapsed, or do they break ranks and admit what's become obvious? His statement didn't just shift perception, it forced alignment. It forced leaders to either echo the recognition or remain silent and risk appearing out of touch. Even more crucially, the statement creates diplomatic flexibility. ECOWAS needs a way to re-engage with Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger without losing face. It can't offer a formal welcome that would undermine everything it claimed to defend. But a few scattered praises. That's a soft re-entry point, a quiet bridge back. Not for reconciliation, but for relevance. Because if the AES bloc continues to harden with Russian defense deals, Chinese infrastructure investments, and increasing Pan-African solidarity, ECOWAS may find itself talking only to itself. And in geopolitics, a club that no longer has leverage becomes a museum piece. So no, the chairman didn't speak out of admiration. He spoke out of necessity. He saw what Burkina Faso had become. He saw what ECOWAS had failed to stop, and he realized that saying nothing was now more dangerous than saying something. But beneath the polished delivery and measured tone, the message wasn't to Traoré, it was to the rest of West Africa. They're not collapsing, they're rising, and if we don't adjust, we may be the ones left behind. There was a time when Burkina Faso's military government was treated like an interruption, a temporary detour on the road back to democracy. A phase that, like others before it, would eventually be corrected, repackaged, and reabsorbed into the fold of Western-backed order. But that time has passed, and the echo was chairman's reluctant acknowledgement is only the latest sign of it. Because Traoré isn't simply managing Burkina Faso. He's modeling something far more dangerous to the old establishment, a functioning alternative. This is what makes him different from the dozens of strong men who came before. They ruled with spectacles. They collapsed under ego. Traoré, by contrast, has made the radical choice to make things work. Schools are opening. Markets are stabilizing. Foreign currency reserves are rising. National production is replacing imports. It's not theoretical. It's not televised. It's physical, local, measurable. In an era where many African governments have become skilled at managing donor expectations, Traoré has bypassed the performance. He doesn't attend summits. He doesn't wear a tie. He doesn't speak in jargon. He governs like a man who believes he has nothing to prove to outsiders and everything to build for those inside. That alone would be enough to unsettle ECOWAS. But it's what's happening beyond Burkina Faso's borders that truly makes this moment historic. The countries once mocked for leaving the bloc are no longer floating alone. They're coordinating defense, co-developing infrastructure, and moving toward a shared currency free of CFA colonial remnants. AES isn't just a breakaway group. It's the nucleus of a new regional model. And guess who's emerging as its ideological compass? Not Goita, not Tani, but Traoré. He's younger, less compromised, more aligned with the energy of a new generation that no longer accepts dependency as a national identity. He speaks in blunt, simple terms, but delivers complex structural outcomes. And when West African youths see his face on protest signs in Sahel or graffiti walls in Ghana, it's not about borders, it's about representation. He's become the avatar of possibility. That's what ECOWAS didn't predict. That leadership wouldn't come from legacy or alliances, but from outcomes. In a region where many presidents still govern like colonial proxies, Traoré has redrawn the blueprint. He's made dignity functional, not just aspirational. And the longer that reality holds, the harder it will be to reverse. Burkina Faso may be relatively small. It may lack flashy skyscrapers or billion-dollar budgets, but it has something that no ECOWAS resolution can manufacture: momentum. Every village was restored. Every refinery is activated. Every soldier turned engineer. These are not symbolic wins. They are precedents, and precedents are contagious. That's why, despite the chairman's praise, there is no formal reconciliation in sight. Because Traoré doesn't need to rejoin the old table. He's building a new one where Africa sets its terms, and progress isn't measured by foreign applause, but by how many children eat, learn, and live without fear. Burkina Faso isn't demanding to be followed. It's simply moving forward. And the rest of West Africa is watching, not out of loyalty, but because they want to know what comes next. Why did ECOWAS suddenly break its silence on Burkina Faso? What did the chairman see that changed everything? Let us know in the comments section. Was it just a casual statement or a political earthquake? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.